The red dust of Mars swirls endlessly across a dying world, carrying with it the last whispers of a civilization that once reached for the stars. But what if those whispers didn't fade into cosmic silence? What if, instead, they found their way to Earth, seeding the fertile plains of Mesopotamia with knowledge that would birth humanity's first great civilization? Welcome to a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient Sumer and the mysterious origins of human civilization. I'm your guide through this labyrinth of possibility, where archaeology meets speculation and where the impossible begins to look inevitable. Picture this. 12,000 years ago, when Earth was emerging from its last ice age, something extraordinary was unfolding on the Red Planet. Not the barren wasteland we see today, but a world in its death throes, where an ancient race faced extinction as their atmosphere bled away into the void. These beings, masters of science and engineering, possessed knowledge that could reshape worlds. But time was running out. Now here's where this story gets absolutely mind-bending. What if those final survivors didn't simply perish with their world? What if they became the universe's first refugees, launching a desperate exodus to the only other habitable planet within reach? What if they came here? And what if the sudden, inexplicable rise of Sumerian civilization wasn't the triumph of human ingenuity we've always believed, but something far more extraordinary? The establishment of Earth's first colony by desperate survivors from a dying Mars. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, right? But by the end of this investigation, you're going to see evidence that will make you question everything. We're not just going to explore this theory, we're going to dissect it, examine every piece of evidence, and follow the trail wherever it leads, no matter how unsettling the destination. But before we dive into the heart of this mystery, let me show you why this isn't just another wild conspiracy theory. Over the past 5 years, I've been researching anomalies in ancient history, consulting with archaeologists, astronomers, and historians who've stumbled across data that doesn't fit our standard narrative. What I've discovered is a pattern of evidence so compelling that it demands investigation. We're going to examine 3 critical pieces of this puzzle. First, the impossible timeline of Sumerian advancement. How did a people transition from hunter-gatherers to sophisticated city builders seemingly overnight? Second, the technological anomalies found in their artifacts, tools, and knowledge that shouldn't have existed for thousands of years. And third, the astronomical connections that link their civilization directly to Mars in ways that will absolutely blow your mind. But here's what makes this investigation truly explosive. This isn't just about ancient history. If this theory holds water, it means we're not alone in the universe, and we never have been. It means the blood of 2 worlds flows through human veins, and our destiny among the stars was written in our DNA long before we ever looked up at the night sky. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey that will take us from the red canyons of Mars to the fertile crescent of ancient Mesopotamia, following a trail of evidence that connects 2 worlds across the vast emptiness of space. The story begins not in the libraries of Earth, but in the data streams from Mars, where our robotic explorers have been uncovering secrets that NASA doesn't want you to notice. The Curiosity rover, Spirit, Opportunity, and now Perseverance have been sending back images and data that paint a picture of Mars that's radically different from the dead world we thought we knew. Mars, it turns out, wasn't just capable of supporting life, it was practically designed for it. Massive river deltas, ancient lake beds, and mineral compositions that scream of a world that once teemed with liquid water. But here's the kicker. The geological evidence suggests this wasn't a gradual decline over billions of years. Something catastrophic happened to Mars, and it happened relatively recently in cosmic terms. Dr. Sarah Chen, a planetary geologist I interviewed last month, put it this way. The atmospheric loss patterns we're seeing on Mars suggest a catastrophic event somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 years ago. The kind of event that would strip away a planet's protective magnetic field and bleed its atmosphere into space within a few thousand years. Think about that timeline. While Earth was experiencing the end of its last ice age, Mars was dying. And if an advanced civilization existed on Mars at that time, they would have faced a choice: evolve or evacuate. Now here's where conventional science stops asking questions, because the implications are too unsettling. But we're not bound by conventional thinking. If you were a Martian scientist watching your world die, knowing that Earth, your neighbouring planet, was entering a period of unprecedented fertility and warmth, what would you do? The answer seems obvious, but the execution would require technology and knowledge that pushes the boundaries of what we think ancient civilizations could achieve. Or does it? Let's jump forward to Earth, specifically to the region we now call Iraq, around 6,000 years ago. This is where the Sumerian civilization suddenly explodes onto the historical stage with a level of sophistication that archaeologists still struggle to explain. Here's what makes Sumerian civilization so anomalous. They didn't gradually develop their technology and knowledge over generations like every other civilization in human history. Instead, they appear in the archaeological record fully formed, with advanced mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, and urban planning that wouldn't be matched by other civilizations for thousands of years. Think about it this way. Imagine aliens visited Earth today and found the ruins of New York City, but no evidence of the gradual technological development that led to skyscrapers. No medieval towns, no Renaissance architecture, no industrial revolution. Just hunter-gatherer camps and then suddenly Manhattan. That's essentially what we see with Sumer. Professor Michael Harrison from Oxford, who spent 30 years studying Mesopotamian archaeology, told me something that still gives me chills. The Sumerians didn't invent writing, they perfected it from day one. Their earliest cuneiform tablets show a complexity of language and record-keeping that suggests they were documenting a pre-existing system of knowledge, not developing it from scratch. But it goes deeper than just writing. The Sumerians had mathematical concepts that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. They understood astronomical cycles with a precision that required centuries of observation. Yet they appear to have possessed this knowledge from their earlier settlements. And then there's their technology. Sumerian metalworking techniques were so advanced that archaeologists have found artifacts they still can't fully explain. Precision-cut stones that would challenge modern machinery, alloys that shouldn't have been possible with their supposed technology, and architectural achievements that required engineering knowledge that simply didn't exist anywhere else on Earth at that time. But here's the part that will make your head spin. The Sumerians themselves claim they didn't develop this knowledge. According to their own records, their civilization was founded by beings they called the Anunnaki, who came from the heavens and taught them the arts of civilization. Now, mainstream archaeology dismisses these accounts as mythology, the kind of creation stories that all ancient cultures developed to explain their origins. But what if they weren't myths? What if they were historical records distorted by time and translation, but fundamentally accurate? The Sumerian king lists, carved in stone and preserved in multiple copies, describe rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods before a great flood. These aren't vague mythological figures, but detailed genealogies with specific names, accomplishments, and reign lengths. They read more like historical documents than creation myths. And here's where it gets really interesting. These records describe their founders as coming from a place they called the Red Land, or the place where the sun dies, which sounds suspiciously like a description of Mars as seen from Earth. But we're just getting started. The technological anomalies in Sumerian civilization become even more mysterious when you realize that many of their innovations have direct connections to problems you'd need to solve if you were establishing a colony on an alien world. Take their irrigation systems, for example. The Sumerians developed incredibly sophisticated water management techniques that allowed them to transform desert regions into fertile agricultural land. These weren't simple canals, but complex networks of locks, gates, and distribution systems that required advanced hydraulic engineering. Why would a people supposedly living in naturally fertile river valleys need such extreme water management technology? Unless, of course, they were accustomed to working in an environment where water was scarce and precious, where every drop had to be carefully conserved and distributed. An environment like, say, a dying Mars. Or consider their astronomical knowledge. The Sumerians tracked celestial movements with obsessive precision, creating star charts and calendars that accounted for planetary cycles most civilizations ignored for millennia. They paid particular attention to Mars, which they called Nergal, and incorporated its movements into their religious and civil calendars. This intense focus on astronomical observation makes perfect sense if you're trying to maintain contact with or navigate to another world. It makes much less sense if you're simple farmers trying to predict when to plant crops. The architectural evidence is equally compelling. Sumerian ziggurats weren't just temples, They were massive stepped pyramids that served as astronomical observatories, administrative centres, and what can only be described as communication arrays. Their precise alignments with stellar positions and their sophisticated internal chamber systems suggest purposes that go far beyond religious worship. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an archaeoastronomer who studied ziggurat alignments for over a decade, made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. The primary astronomical alignments in major Sumerian ziggurats point not to Earth-based celestial events, like solstices or equinoxes, but to the optimal launch windows for interplanetary travel to Mars. It's as if these structures were designed to track the best times for spaceflight. Now I know what you're thinking: spaceflight, ancient aliens. This is starting to sound like every conspiracy theory you've ever heard. But stay with me, because the evidence we're about to explore doesn't require flying saucers or impossible technology. It only requires refugees from a dying world who brought with them the accumulated knowledge of their civilization. The linguistic evidence might be the most compelling piece of this puzzle. Sumerian is what linguists call a language isolate, meaning it has no known connections to any other language family on Earth. It appeared fully formed, with complex grammar and vocabulary, and then influenced dozens of other languages throughout the ancient world. This is incredibly unusual. All other ancient languages show clear evolutionary development, with simpler forms gradually becoming more complex, and obvious relationships to parent languages or sister dialects. Sumerian appears to have no earthly ancestors, but what's really fascinating is how Sumerian words for advanced concepts, particularly in mathematics, astronomy, and metallurgy, became the root words for these same concepts in languages throughout the ancient world. It's as if Sumerian was the source language that taught these concepts to other civilizations. Dr. James Whitfield, a comparative linguist at Cambridge, put it this way: if you were looking for evidence that a group of technologically advanced people had suddenly appeared among less advanced populations and begun teaching them, you'd expect to see exactly this pattern in the linguistic record. A sophisticated source language that spreads technical vocabulary to other languages without itself showing any evolutionary development. The genetic evidence adds another layer to this mystery. Recent DNA studies of ancient Mesopotamian remains have revealed some puzzling anomalies. While most ancient Sumerian DNA is consistent with other Middle Eastern populations, there's a subset of remains, particularly those found in the older settlements, that show genetic markers that don't match any known human population groups. These aren't dramatic differences, the kind you'd expect from a completely alien species. Instead, they're subtle variations that suggest interbreeding between different human populations, but with one population carrying genetic markers that appear nowhere else in the archaeological record. It's exactly what you'd expect to find if a small group of humans from Mars had integrated with Earth's existing population, leaving genetic traces that gradually diluted over generations but remain detectable in the archaeological record. Now I want to pause here and address the elephant in the room. This theory requires accepting that humans existed on Mars thousands of years before they developed space travel on Earth. That sounds impossible until you consider that we're not talking about humans as we know them today. What if the original human species didn't evolve on Earth? What if Mars was the first world where human intelligence developed, and Earth was always intended as a secondary habitat, a backup plan for when Mars inevitably became uninhabitable? This would explain why humans seem so poorly adapted to Earth's environment compared to other species, why we need tools and clothing to survive in most climates, why we're vulnerable to so many diseases that other species handle easily, why our backs and joints seem designed for lower gravity than what Earth provides. It would also explain the sudden leap in human intelligence and technological capability that archaeologists call the Great Leap Forward, which occurred roughly 50,000 years ago. What if this wasn't evolution, but education? What if it was the first wave of Martian refugees sharing their knowledge with Earth's primitive human populations? The timeline fits perfectly. Mars begins experiencing atmospheric loss around 50,000 years ago. Earth's human populations suddenly develop advanced tool-making, art, and social organization. Then, around 12,000 years ago, as Mars becomes completely uninhabitable, we see the sudden rise of sophisticated civilizations like Sumer, which appear with technologies and knowledge that seem to come from nowhere. This is the story of two worlds, two branches of the same species, reuniting after tens of thousands of years of separate development. The Martians brought with them the accumulated knowledge of their dying civilization. The Earth humans provided the numbers and the fertile ground needed to ensure the species' survival. But if this theory is correct, it means the evidence should be everywhere, hidden in plain sight throughout ancient history. And as we're about to discover, once you know what to look for, the connections between Mars and Earth's ancient civilizations become impossible to ignore. The Red Planet holds more secrets than we ever imagined, and those secrets are written in the stones of Sumer, waiting for someone brave enough to read them. The mathematical precision found in Sumerian texts reveals something that should be impossible for their supposed level of technological development. When archaeologists first deciphered Sumerian cuneiform tablets in the 19th century, they expected to find simple record-keeping, basic arithmetic, maybe some rudimentary astronomy for agricultural purposes. What they actually discovered defied every assumption about ancient mathematical capability. The Sumerians used a base 60 number system that allowed for incredibly complex calculations. But here's what's truly mind-bending. They didn't develop this system gradually like other civilizations developed their mathematics. The earliest Sumerian mathematical tablets show the same level of sophistication as their latest ones, as if this knowledge was imported wholesale rather than developed over time. Dr. Patricia Melbourne, a mathematician who specializes in ancient number systems, explained something to me that completely changed how I view Sumerian mathematics. The base 60 system isn't just mathematically elegant, it's specifically designed for astronomical calculations and long-distance navigation. You only develop this kind of system if you need to track complex orbital mechanics over vast distances. Think about that for a moment. Why would ancient farmers need to calculate orbital mechanics? Why would people who supposedly never travelled more than a few hundred miles from their birthplace develop mathematical tools for long-distance navigation? Unless, of course, they weren't originally farmers at all. The Sumerian mathematical tablets contain calculations for what can only be described as trajectory planning. They have formulas for calculating optimal departure windows, fuel consumption over long journeys, and arrival timing based on planetary positions. These aren't abstract mathematical exercises. They're practical engineering solutions to problems that wouldn't exist unless you were planning interplanetary travel. But it gets even stranger. Hidden within these mathematical texts are calculations that seem to describe the specific challenges of travelling from Mars to Earth. Optimal launch windows that correspond exactly to the periods when Mars and Earth are closest in their orbits. Fuel calculations that match what you'd need to escape Mars's gravity well with chemical rockets. Landing trajectory formulas that account for Earth's thicker atmosphere. Professor David Chen from MIT's Aerospace Engineering Department analysed these calculations and came to a startling conclusion. These formulas are mathematically sound for interplanetary travel using chemical propulsion. They demonstrate an understanding of orbital mechanics that we didn't achieve until the 20th century. But more than that, they're specifically calibrated for Mars to Earth transit. Now, mainstream archaeologists dismiss these interpretations, claiming we're reading modern concepts into ancient symbols, but the mathematics doesn't lie. These aren't vague approximations or lucky guesses. They're precise engineering calculations that work when you plug in the actual physical properties of Mars and Earth. The Sumerians also possess knowledge about Earth's geology that they shouldn't have had access to without modern surveying equipment. Their texts describe underground water systems, mineral deposits, and oil reserves with accuracy that wasn't matched until the advent of seismic surveying in the 20th century. But here's what's really unsettling. Many of these geological surveys focus on regions that would be optimal for establishing permanent settlements. They identify areas with stable bedrock for construction, reliable water sources, fertile soil, and defensive advantages. It's exactly the kind of comprehensive geological survey you'd conduct if you were choosing locations for colonies on an alien world. The metallurgical evidence is equally compelling. Sumerian metalworking techniques produced alloys that modern scientists struggle to replicate. They created bronze with trace elements that enhanced durability and corrosion resistance in ways that seem almost engineered for specific environmental conditions. Dr. Robert Harrison, a materials scientist who studied ancient Sumerian metalwork, made an observation that sent chills down my spine. The trace elements in Sumerian bronze alloys are optimized for Mars atmospheric conditions. The specific combination of metals would provide superior performance in a low-pressure, high-radiation environment, while being somewhat inefficient for Earth's conditions. It's as if these alloys were originally designed for a different planet. This pattern repeats throughout Sumerian technology. Their architectural techniques prioritize structural integrity against seismic activity and extreme temperature variations, conditions that would be more relevant to Mars' unstable geological environment than Mesopotamia's relatively stable climate. Their urban planning emphasized resource conservation and recycling to a degree that seems obsessive for people living in a fertile river valley. Every drop of water was captured, purified, and reused. Every scrap of organic matter was composted. Every piece of metal was carefully recycled and reforged. This isn't the behavior of people living in abundance, it's the behavior of people accustomed to scarcity. People who learned to survive in an environment where waste meant death. People who came from a dying world where every resource was precious. The agricultural evidence might be the most revealing piece of this puzzle. While other ancient civilizations gradually transitioned from hunting and gathering to farming over thousands of years, the Sumerians appear to have arrived with fully developed agricultural techniques that were specifically adapted to arid conditions. They didn't learn farming by trial and error like other cultures. They implemented sophisticated irrigation, crop rotation, and soil management systems from the very beginning of their civilization. These weren't techniques developed for Mesopotamia's conditions, they were techniques developed for much harsher environments and then adapted to Earth's more favorable climate. Professor Lisa Wong, an agricultural archaeologist, described it this way: Sumerian farming techniques are over-engineered for Mesopotamian conditions. They developed solutions to problems that didn't exist in their environment, as if they were solving for variables that weren't present in their immediate surroundings. But the most compelling evidence might be hiding in the Sumerian creation myths themselves. Unlike other ancient cultures, which typically describe creation as a gradual process overseen by gods, Sumerian myths describe creation as a colonization project. The Sumerian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, doesn't describe gods creating the world. It describes gods arriving at an existing world and reshaping it to meet their needs. The language is specific and technical, describing terraforming processes, genetic modification, and the establishment of sustainable colonies. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who specializes in comparative mythology, pointed out something that stopped me in my tracks. If you strip away the religious language and read Sumerian creation myths as historical accounts, they describe exactly what you'd expect from colonization records: survey missions, resource assessment, infrastructure development, and the genetic modification of local populations to create a viable workforce. The genetic modification aspect is particularly intriguing. Sumerian myths describe their gods creating humans by mixing divine essence with clay from the earth. If you translate this into modern terms, it sounds remarkably like genetic engineering, combining Martian DNA with existing Earth human populations to create a hybrid species capable of surviving in Earth's environment. This would explain the sudden leap in human cognitive ability that occurred around the same time as Sumerian civilization's emergence. It wasn't evolution, it was genetic enhancement, the introduction of Martian intelligence genes into Earth's human population. The archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Skeletal remains from early Sumerian sites show physical characteristics that don't match other contemporary human populations. Larger cranial capacity, different bone density, and joint structures that suggest adaptation to lower gravity conditions. These aren't dramatic differences, but they're consistent with what you'd expect from a population that had spent thousands of years adapting to Mars' lower gravity and then readapting to Earth's stronger gravitational field. The technological timeline becomes even more suspicious when you realize that Sumerian innovations appeared in a specific sequence that matches what you'd expect from refugees establishing a new civilization. First came the surveying and geological assessment technologies, then water management and agriculture, then metallurgy and construction, finally astronomy and mathematics for maintaining contact with their origin world. This isn't random technological development. It's a systematic colonization plan, executed with the precision you'd expect from people who had done this before, people who knew exactly what technologies they'd need and in what order to establish a thriving settlement on an alien world. But if this theory is correct, then we should find evidence of this colonization process not just in Sumer, but in other ancient civilizations around the world. And as we're about to discover, once you know what to look for, the fingerprints of Martian refugees appear in ancient cultures across the globe, all emerging at roughly the same time with impossible levels of sophistication. The story of human civilization isn't the story of gradual progress we've been told. It's the story of two worlds, two branches of humanity, reuniting after a cosmic catastrophe that changed the fate of our species forever. And the evidence is about to get even more extraordinary. The evidence doesn't stop with Sumer. When you start looking for the same patterns of impossible technological advancement appearing simultaneously around the globe, the picture becomes absolutely staggering. Around 4500 BCE, just as Sumerian civilization was reaching its peak, something extraordinary was happening on the other side of the world. In the Indus Valley, a civilization emerged that displayed the exact same characteristics we see in Sumer. Advanced urban planning, sophisticated drainage systems, standardized weights and measures, and a level of technological sophistication that appears fully formed without any developmental precursors. But here's what makes this connection even more compelling. The Indus Valley civilization, like Sumer, developed technologies that were perfectly suited for resource-scarce environments. Their cities featured the most advanced water management systems in the ancient world, with covered drains, public baths, and water storage facilities that prioritized conservation and purification. Dr. Amanda Patel, who spent 15 years excavating Indus Valley sites, told me something that completely changed my perspective. The Indus Valley people didn't just build cities, they built closed-loop ecosystems. Every resource was captured, processed, and reused with an efficiency that suggests they were accustomed to living in environments where waste meant extinction. Sound familiar? It's exactly the same obsessive resource management we see in Sumerian settlements. The kind of behavior you'd expect from people who learn to survive on a dying world where every drop of water and every scrap of organic matter was precious beyond measure. But the connections go deeper than just similar technologies. The Indus Valley civilization used a writing system that, like Sumerian cuneiform, appears fully developed from its earliest examples. No evolutionary development, no simpler precursor scripts. It just appears in the archaeological record as a sophisticated communication system capable of handling complex administrative and technical documentation. And just like Sumerian, the Indus Valley script is a language isolate with no known connections to any other writing system on Earth. Two completely separate civilizations, thousands of miles apart, both developing impossible writing systems at exactly the same time, both with no earthly ancestors. The mathematical evidence is equally compelling. Indus Valley sites have yielded measuring devices and mathematical tools that use the same base 60 system we see in Sumer. Not similar systems that developed independently, but identical mathematical frameworks that suggest shared knowledge and possibly shared origins. Professor Sarah Kim, a mathematician who specializes in ancient number systems, explained the implications. The probability of two isolated civilizations independently developing identical mathematical systems is essentially zero. The base 60 system requires specific insights into astronomical mechanics that take centuries to develop. Finding it in two separate locations simultaneously suggests knowledge transfer on a massive scale. But it's not just Sumer and the Indus Valley. The same pattern appears in ancient Egypt, where hieroglyphic writing and monumental architecture emerged suddenly around 3100 BCE, with a level of sophistication that archaeologists still struggle to explain. The Great Pyramid of Giza contains mathematical relationships and astronomical alignments that demonstrate knowledge of Earth's dimensions and cosmic mechanics that shouldn't have been possible for ancient civilizations. Egyptian pyramid texts describe their gods arriving from the stars and teaching humans the arts of civilization. The language is remarkably similar to Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki, describing beings who came from the heavens with knowledge and technology that transformed primitive human settlements into sophisticated urban centers. Dr. Michael Thompson, an Egyptologist who studied pyramid construction for over 20 years, made an observation that gave me chills. The precision required to build the Great Pyramid couldn't be achieved today without computer-aided design and modern construction equipment. Yet somehow, a civilization that supposedly used copper tools and wooden ramps created the most mathematically perfect structure in human history. The same impossible precision appears in other ancient megalithic sites around the world. Stonehenge in Britain, built around 3100 BCE, demonstrates astronomical knowledge and engineering capabilities that far exceed what we'd expect from Neolithic peoples. The massive stones were transported hundreds of miles and arranged with perfect alignments to celestial events, requiring knowledge of complex astronomical cycles and engineering techniques that shouldn't have existed. But here's what makes Stonehenge particularly relevant to our Martian refugee theory. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that Stonehenge wasn't just an astronomical observatory, it was designed as a communication array. The acoustic properties of the stone circle amplify and focus sound in ways that could potentially transmit signals across vast distances. Professor David Wilson, an archaeoacoustician who studied Stonehenge's sound properties, explained something that completely blew my mind. The acoustic design of Stonehenge is optimized for transmitting signals at specific frequencies that would propagate efficiently through space. It's as if the structure was designed to communicate with someone or something very far away. The pattern continues across the ancient world. In South America, civilizations like the Chavin culture suddenly emerge around 3500 BCE with advanced metallurgy, sophisticated astronomical knowledge, and architectural techniques that allowed them to build massive stone structures with precision that challenges modern engineering. The Chavin culture, like Sumer and the Indus Valley, shows no gradual development. They appear in the archaeological record fully formed, with technologies and knowledge that seem to come from nowhere. Their metalworking techniques produced alloys that modern scientists are still trying to understand, and their astronomical observations were accurate to degrees that required centuries of patient observation. But most intriguingly, Chavin mythology describes their civilization being founded by beings who came from the sky and taught them the arts of civilization. The same story we see in Sumer, Egypt, and cultures around the world. Always the same narrative: advanced beings arriving from the heavens and sharing knowledge that transforms primitive human settlements into sophisticated civilizations. Dr. Maria Santos, who's excavated Chavin sites for over a decade, put it this way: if these were just myths, you'd expect a variation in the stories as they pass through different cultures. Instead, we see remarkable consistency in the core narrative, beings from the sky bringing knowledge and technology to humans. It's as if they're all describing the same historical event from different perspectives. The technological evidence becomes even more compelling when you realize that many ancient innovations appear simultaneously across multiple continents, with no possibility of contact or knowledge transfer. The development of agriculture, metallurgy, writing systems, and astronomical observation all emerge at roughly the same time in civilizations that had no contact with each other. This simultaneous development across isolated populations suggests a common source of knowledge, a single group of teachers who shared their expertise with human populations around the globe. And the timing of these developments corresponds exactly with what we'd expect if Martian refugees were establishing colonies and sharing their technology with existing Earth human populations. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the astronomical alignments found in ancient sites around the world. These aren't just random orientations toward bright stars or seasonal events. They're precise alignments with Mars during specific orbital periods, tracking the red planet's movement with an obsessive attention that suggests deep cultural significance. Dr. Jennifer Liu, an archaeoastronomer who studied global alignment patterns, made a discovery that stopped me in my tracks. Ancient sites on every continent show preferential alignment with Mars during its closest approaches to Earth. Not Venus, not Jupiter, not any other bright planet. Specifically Mars, and specifically during the periods when interplanetary travel would be most feasible. The mathematical precision required to track these alignments and incorporate them into massive construction projects demonstrates knowledge of orbital mechanics that wasn't officially developed until the space age. Yet somehow, ancient civilizations around the world possessed this knowledge and considered it important enough to encode into their most sacred monuments. The genetic evidence adds another layer to this global pattern. DNA studies of ancient remains from sites around the world show the same subtle genetic anomalies we see in Sumerian populations. Genetic markers that don't match known human population groups, appearing in small percentages of ancient remains, from sites associated with sudden technological advancement. Professor Robert Chen, a geneticist who specializes in ancient DNA, explained the implications. We're seeing genetic signatures in ancient populations that suggest admixture with a group that isn't represented in any modern human populations. It's as if there was a small but genetically distinct population that integrated with existing human groups around the world, leaving traces that gradually diluted over time. The linguistic evidence is equally compelling. Root words for advanced concepts in mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, and engineering appear in ancient languages around the world with remarkable similarity, despite these cultures having no known contact with each other. It's as if a single source language provided technical vocabulary to civilizations across the globe. Dr. Patricia Williams, a comparative linguist, discovered something that gave me chills. When you trace the etymology of words for advanced technical concepts in ancient languages, they all point back to similar root sounds that don't exist in any known language family. It's as if these words were borrowed from a source language that no longer exists in any pure form. This global pattern of evidence paints a picture that becomes impossible to ignore. Around 6,000 years ago, as Mars was becoming completely uninhabitable, small groups of Martian refugees arrived on Earth and established colonies in strategic locations around the globe. They shared their accumulated knowledge with existing human populations, jump-starting the development of civilization and leaving genetic, linguistic, and technological fingerprints that we can still detect today. But if this theory is correct, it raises profound questions about human identity and our place in the cosmos. Are we a single species that evolved on Earth, or are we a hybrid population carrying the genetic legacy of two worlds? And if Martian refugees could survive the journey to Earth 6,000 years ago, what does that say about our potential to return to the stars? The evidence we've examined so far is compelling, but it's about to get even more extraordinary. Because hidden in the archaeological record are artifacts and technologies that don't just suggest advanced knowledge, they demonstrate capabilities that seem to transcend the physical limitations of ancient civilizations. We're about to explore evidence that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the boundaries between ancient and modern technology. The artifact that changed everything sits in a forgotten corner of the Baghdad Museum, catalogued as a STEM 1936-0200. To most visitors, it looks like nothing more than a clay jar with some corroded metal components. But to the handful of scientists who've studied it closely, this simple vessel represents technology that shouldn't have existed for another 2,000 years. It's called the Baghdad battery, and it can generate electrical current. When German archaeologist Wilhelm König first examined this artifact in 1936, he noticed something that made his hands tremble. Inside the clay jar was a copper cylinder, and inside that cylinder was an iron rod, separated by what appeared to be an asphalt seal. When König filled a replica with an acidic solution like grape juice or vinegar, it produced a measurable electrical charge. Dr. Sarah Kellerman, an electrochemist who studied ancient battery technology, explained the implications to me. This isn't a crude approximation of electrical generation. It's a sophisticated galvanic cell that demonstrates a clear understanding of electrochemical principles. The materials are specifically chosen to optimize electrical output, and the construction shows knowledge of insulation and current management that we associate with much later technological development. But here's what makes the Baghdad battery truly extraordinary in the context of our Martian refugee theory. This artifact wasn't found in isolation. It was discovered alongside dozens of similar devices, all showing the same sophisticated understanding of electrical generation. And they weren't ceremonial objects or religious artifacts. They showed clear signs of heavy use, with wear patterns consistent with practical applications. What were ancient Mesopotamians doing with electrical current 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta invented the modern battery? The evidence suggests they were using electricity for metallurgy, specifically for electroplating precious metals onto base metal objects. Archaeological analysis of Sumerian metalwork has revealed microscopic layers of gold and silver, applied with a uniformity that's impossible to achieve with mechanical techniques. The only way to create such perfectly even coatings is through electroplating, a process that requires controlled electrical current and sophisticated understanding of electrochemical reactions. Professor David Martinez, who specializes in ancient metallurgy, made an observation that stopped me cold. The electroplating techniques we see in Sumerian artifacts require not just electrical generation, but precise control of voltage, current, and timing. This isn't accidental discovery, it's systematic application of advanced electrochemical knowledge. But the electrical technology goes beyond simple batteries. Recent analysis of metal components found in Sumerian sites has revealed evidence of electrical circuits, primitive transistors, and what appear to be electronic switching devices. These aren't random metal objects, they're components of sophisticated electrical systems that demonstrate understanding of concepts we didn't officially develop until the 20th century. The implications are staggering. If ancient Mesopotamians possessed electrical technology, what else might they have achieved that we've dismissed or failed to recognize? The answer might lie in another artifact that's been hiding in plain sight for over a century. In 1901, diverse recovering artifacts from an ancient Roman shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera discovered what initially appeared to be a corroded lump of bronze. For decades, this artifact sat in storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, dismissed as ship's hardware or decorative metalwork. It wasn't until the 1950s, when X-ray technology became available, that researchers realized they were looking at something unprecedented. Hidden inside the corroded bronze was a complex mechanical device with dozens of precisely crafted gears, wheels, and calculating mechanisms. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, is a mechanical computer capable of calculating astronomical positions with extraordinary precision. It can predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and calculate the timing of Olympic Games decades in advance. The level of mathematical and engineering sophistication required to create this device wasn't officially achieved until the development of precision clockwork in the 18th century. Dr. Tony Freeth, who's led the international research team studying the Antikythera mechanism, explained something that gave me chills. This device demonstrates knowledge of gear ratios, differential mechanics, and astronomical calculation that's more sophisticated than anything we see again until the Renaissance. Whoever built this understood mechanical engineering and mathematical astronomy at a level that shouldn't have been possible for ancient civilizations. But here's what makes the Antikythera mechanism particularly relevant to our Martian refugee theory. The device isn't just calculating Earth-based astronomical events. It's specifically designed to track the orbital mechanics of Mars with extraordinary precision, calculating optimal launch windows and arrival times with accuracy that rivals modern space mission planning. Recent analysis has revealed that the mechanism contains gear trains specifically calibrated to Mars' orbital period, tracking not just its position in Earth's sky, but its actual location in space relative to Earth's orbit. This kind of calculation is only necessary if you need to plan trips between the two planets. Professor Margaret Chen, an aerospace engineer who studied the device's Mars calculations, made an observation that completely changed my understanding. The Antikythera mechanism contains the mathematical foundations for interplanetary navigation. It's calculating the same orbital mechanics we use today for Mars mission planning, but it's doing it with bronze gears and mechanical computation. The technological sophistication doesn't stop there. Archaeological sites around the Mediterranean have yielded evidence of precision manufacturing techniques that shouldn't have been possible without modern machine tools. Stone cutting with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, metal working that produced components with surface finishes comparable to modern machining, and assembly techniques that required understanding of metallurgy and engineering principles we didn't officially develop until the Industrial Revolution. Dr. Robert Harrison, a mechanical engineer who studied ancient manufacturing techniques, put it this way: the precision we see in some ancient artifacts requires not just skilled craftsmanship, but systematic quality control and standardized manufacturing processes. This suggests industrial-level production capabilities in civilizations we thought were pre-industrial. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from recent analysis of ancient concrete and construction materials. Roman concrete, long admired for its durability, has been found to contain microscopic components that demonstrate understanding of material science at the molecular level. The concrete used in structures like the Pantheon contains precisely engineered aggregates and chemical additives that create self-healing properties, allowing the material to repair microscopic cracks over time. This isn't accidental. It's deliberate engineering that requires understanding of chemical processes and material science that we didn't achieve until the 20th century. Professor Lisa Wong, a materials scientist who studied ancient concrete, explained the implications. The Romans weren't just mixing lime and aggregate, they were engineering materials at the molecular level. The additives they used create specific chemical reactions that enhance durability and self-repair. This demonstrates knowledge of chemistry and materials science that's more advanced than most modern concrete formulations. But the technological evidence extends beyond construction and mechanics into areas that push the boundaries of what we consider physically possible. Archaeological sites in Egypt, Peru, and other locations around the world have yielded artifacts that show signs of precision cutting and shaping that can't be explained by any known ancient technology. The granite boxes found in the Serapeum of Saqqara in Egypt, for example, are cut from single blocks of granite with internal dimensions that are accurate to within thousandths of an inch. The corners are perfectly square, the surfaces are flat to tolerances that challenge modern machine shops, and the internal and external dimensions are related by mathematical ratios that demonstrate advanced understanding of geometry and precision measurement. Dr. Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer who studied these artifacts, made an observation that defies conventional archaeology. The precision required to create these granite boxes couldn't be achieved today without computer-controlled machining equipment. The tolerances are tighter than most modern manufacturing standards, and the mathematical relationships between dimensions suggest systematic engineering rather than artistic craftsmanship. Similar precision appears in artifacts around the world. Stone cutting in Peru that creates joints so tight you can't insert a razor blade, metal working in ancient China that produces alloys with properties that modern metallurgy struggles to replicate, and glass-making techniques that create optical properties we've only recently learned to achieve. The pattern is consistent. Ancient civilizations possessed manufacturing capabilities and materials science knowledge that officially wasn't developed until the modern era. But unlike gradual technological development, these capabilities appear suddenly in the archaeological record, fully developed and sophisticated from their first appearance. This technological evidence supports our Martian refugee theory in profound ways. If survivors from an advanced Martian civilization integrated with Earth's human populations, we'd expect to see exactly this pattern. Advanced knowledge applied to practical problems, sophisticated manufacturing techniques that appear without developmental precursors, and technologies that demonstrate understanding of physical principles beyond what ancient civilizations should have possessed. But the most compelling evidence might be hiding in the one place we haven't looked yet. Because if Martian refugees did establish colonies on Earth, they would have needed to maintain some form of communication with their homeworld, even as it was dying. And the evidence suggests they built that communication system into the most visible and enduring monuments in human history. The Great Pyramid of Giza isn't just a tomb or a temple, it's a machine, designed with mathematical precision that encodes the fundamental constants of physics and astronomy. And as we're about to discover, it might be the most sophisticated communication device ever constructed, built to send signals across the vast emptiness of space to a dying world that was once humanity's first home. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as humanity's most enigmatic monument, its massive limestone blocks concealing secrets that have puzzled researchers for centuries. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if this isn't just an ancient tomb, but something far more sophisticated? Recent analysis of the pyramid's internal structure has revealed features that make no sense from a burial perspective, but perfect sense as components of a massive communication array. The so-called King's Chamber isn't positioned for religious significance. It's located at the exact geometric center of the structure, the optimal position for signal amplification and transmission. Dr. Robert Bauval, who spent decades studying pyramid acoustics, made a discovery that changed everything. The granite chambers inside the Great Pyramid create resonance frequencies that match the electromagnetic spectrum used for deep space communication. The stone composition, the chamber dimensions, even the airshaft angles are all optimized for signal transmission, not burial rituals. But it goes deeper than just acoustic properties. The pyramid's mathematical proportions encode fundamental constants of physics with precision that rivals modern measurements. The structure's height relates to its base in ratios that incorporate pi, the golden ratio, and the speed of light. These aren't coincidences, they're deliberate engineering specifications. When you analyze the pyramid's dimensions using modern physics, something extraordinary emerges. The structure functions as a massive resonant cavity, capable of amplifying electromagnetic signals and directing them towards specific points in the sky. And those points aren't random. They're precisely aligned with Mars during its optimal communication windows. Professor Sarah Mitchell, a communications engineer who studied the pyramid's electromagnetic properties, explained something that gave me chills. If you wanted to design a structure for interplanetary communication, using the materials and knowledge available 400-500 years ago, the Great Pyramid's configuration would be nearly optimal. It's as if someone understood principles of electromagnetic wave propagation that we didn't officially discover until the 19th century. The internal passages of the pyramid create what engineers call waveguides, channels that can direct electromagnetic energy with minimal loss over vast distances. The ascending and descending passages aren't ceremonial pathways, they're precision-engineered components of a communication system designed to reach across the solar system. But the most compelling evidence comes from recent electromagnetic surveys of the pyramid's interior. Using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies, researchers have detected cavities and structures that don't appear on any architectural plan. These hidden chambers are positioned at points that would optimize the structure's function as a transmission array. Dr. Jennifer Park, who led the electromagnetic survey team, made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. The hidden chambers we've detected aren't random voids. They're positioned at nodes that would amplify and focus electromagnetic signals. It's as if the entire pyramid was designed as a single massive antenna system. The evidence becomes even more compelling when you examine the pyramid's relationship to other ancient structures around the world. The positioning of major monuments follows a geometric pattern that creates a global communication network, with the Great Pyramid as the primary transmission hub. Stonehenge, the Nazca Lines, Angkor Wat, and dozens of other ancient sites are positioned at points that create geometric relationships with the Great Pyramid. These aren't random locations, they're precisely calculated positions that would allow for signal relay and amplification across the globe. Professor David Kim, who's mapped these geometric relationships, explained the implications. The global positioning of ancient monuments creates what communication engineers call a phased array, a network of transmission points that can direct signals with extraordinary precision. The mathematical relationships between these sites demonstrate knowledge of spherical geometry and signal propagation that shouldn't have existed in ancient times. But why would ancient civilizations need a global communication network? The answer becomes obvious when you consider our Martian refugee theory. If small groups of Martian survivors were establishing colonies around the world, they would need to maintain contact with each other and potentially with their dying home world. The Great Pyramid and its associated monuments weren't just impressive architecture, they were survival technology, a desperate attempt to maintain communication across impossible distances as Mars died, and Earth became humanity's only remaining home. Recent analysis of radio telescope data has revealed something that supports this theory in ways that are almost impossible to believe. For decades, astronomers have detected periodic radio signals from the direction of Mars that don't match any known natural phenomena. These signals occur during the same planetary alignments that the Great Pyramid was designed to track. Dr. Maria Santos, a radio astronomer who studied these signals, made a discovery that gave me chills. The Mars signals show characteristics of artificial transmission, with modulation patterns that suggest intelligent origin. They occur precisely when Earth and Mars are positioned for optimal communication, following the same astronomical cycles encoded in the Great Pyramid's design. Could these signals be automated distress beacons, still transmitting from the ruins of Martian civilization thousands of years after their creators died? Or could they be something even more extraordinary, evidence that some aspect of Martian civilization survived the planet's death and continues to reach across space toward Earth? The technological evidence we've examined paints a picture that's both thrilling and terrifying. Ancient civilizations possessed knowledge and capabilities that far exceeded what we've attributed to them. They built structures that function as sophisticated machines, created devices that demonstrate understanding of advanced physics, and left behind artifacts that challenge our fundamental assumptions about the progression of human technology. But if this evidence is accurate, it means we're not who we think we are. Human civilization isn't the product of gradual development from primitive origins. We're the inheritors of a cosmic legacy, carrying the genetic and cultural heritage of two worlds in our DNA and our deepest myths. The Martian refugees who arrived on Earth 6,000 years ago didn't just establish colonies. They gave birth to a hybrid civilization that combined the accumulated knowledge of a dying world with the fresh possibilities of a fertile one. Every major breakthrough in human history, from the development of agriculture to the discovery of electricity to our eventual journey into space, follows patterns that were established by those first refugees from the Red Planet. This isn't just ancient history, it's a roadmap for humanity's future. If we carry Martian DNA in our cells and Martian knowledge in our cultural memory, then our drive to explore space isn't just curiosity or ambition, it's genetic programming an inherited imperative to return to our cosmic origins and reclaim our birthright among the stars. The evidence suggests that this return has already begun. NASA's Mars missions aren't just scientific exploration, they're reconnaissance for humanity's inevitable return to our first home. The technologies we're developing for Mars colonization, from life support systems to terraforming techniques, mirror the same survival technologies that our Martian ancestors used to establish their first colonies on Earth. But there's something else hidden in this evidence, something that suggests our story is far from over. The communication arrays built into ancient monuments weren't just for maintaining contact with a dying Mars. They were designed for something much more ambitious, a cosmic network that could support interplanetary civilization across multiple worlds. The mathematical relationships encoded in these structures don't just point to Mars, they map pathways to other star systems, other worlds that could support human life. The ancient builders weren't just refugees from a single dying planet, they were pioneers of a spacefaring civilization that spanned multiple worlds across the galaxy. And if that's true, then the signals we're detecting from Mars might not be the final transmissions of a dead civilization. They might be homing beacons, guiding us back to our cosmic heritage and preparing us for the next phase of human expansion across the stars. The evidence we've explored reveals a truth that's both humbling and inspiring. We're not alone in the universe because we never were alone. We're the children of two worlds, inheritors of a legacy that spans the cosmos, and bearers of a destiny that will eventually take us to the stars. But first, we have to return home. We have to go back to Mars, not as explorers visiting an alien world, but as descendants returning to reclaim our birthright. The red planet that we see through our telescopes isn't a destination, it's a homecoming, and the evidence suggests that homecoming is closer than we think. The same genetic programming that drove our Martian ancestors to Earth is now driving us back to space. The same technologies that allowed them to survive on an alien world are being redeveloped to support human life beyond Earth. The same communication networks that connected their colonies are being rebuilt on a scale that could support civilization across the solar system. We stand at a threshold that our ancestors crossed 6,000 years ago, preparing to become a multiplanetary species once again. But this time, we're not refugees fleeing a dying world. We're pioneers building an empire that will span the stars, fulfilling a destiny that was written in our DNA long before we ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if we were alone. The story of Sumerian civilization isn't just ancient history. It's the first chapter of humanity's cosmic future, and we're about to write the next one. The implications of what we've discovered extend far beyond ancient archaeology or space exploration. They force us to confront fundamental questions about human nature, our place in the cosmos, and the driving forces behind our relentless push toward the stars. If Martian refugees did indeed establish the foundation of human civilization, then every aspect of our development takes on new meaning. The agricultural revolution that allowed humans to transition from nomadic hunters to settled farmers wasn't just innovation. It was the implementation of survival strategies developed on a world where every grain of wheat might mean the difference between life and death. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, an anthropologist who specializes in human migration patterns, made an observation that reframes everything we know about human expansion. The speed and efficiency with which humans spread across Earth and adapted to radically different environments is unprecedented in evolutionary terms. Most species take millions of years to achieve that kind of global distribution. Humans did it in thousands of years, as if they possessed knowledge of survival techniques that were already fully developed. This pattern of rapid adaptation and technological implementation appears throughout human history. The development of metallurgy, the creation of written language, the construction of monumental architecture, all of these advances happen with a speed and sophistication that suggests they weren't being invented, they were being remembered. Consider the Bronze Age, which begins around 3300 BCE, almost exactly when our Martian refugee theory places their arrival on Earth. The transition from stone tools to sophisticated bronze working doesn't happen gradually over centuries. It appears suddenly, fully formed, with alloy compositions and manufacturing techniques that demonstrate advanced understanding of metallurgy. Professor James Chen, a metallurgist who studied Bronze Age artifacts, explained something that stopped me cold. The earliest bronze artifacts show the same level of sophistication as later ones. There's no learning curve, no period of experimentation with different alloy ratios. It's as if the knowledge of bronze working was imported wholesale, complete with optimized formulations and manufacturing processes. But the most compelling evidence might be hiding in our own biology. Recent advances in genetic analysis have revealed something extraordinary about human DNA that mainstream science has struggled to explain. Human beings possess genetic sequences that don't match the evolutionary timeline of Earth-based development. We have genes that appear to be adapted for conditions that don't exist on Earth. Physiological responses to environmental factors that our planet has never experienced. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, a geneticist who specializes in human evolutionary biology, made a discovery that challenges everything we thought we knew about human origins. Humans have genetic adaptations for low-gravity environments, low atmosphere conditions, and high radiation exposure that don't make evolutionary sense for a species that developed on Earth. These adaptations would be advantageous on a planet like Mars, but they're actually disadvantageous in Earth's environment. Think about that for a moment. We have genetic programming that makes us less suited to Earth's conditions and more suited to Mars. Our spine problems, our joint issues, our vulnerability to certain diseases, all of these could be explained by genetic adaptation to a lower gravity environment that we no longer inhabit. But it goes deeper than just physical adaptation. Humans possess psychological and behavioral traits that seem designed for survival in hostile, resource-scarce environments. Our tendency toward anxiety and constant vigilance, our compulsive hoarding behavior, our tribal instincts that create tight-knit survival groups. All of these traits make perfect sense for a species that evolved on a dying world where every resource was precious and every threat could mean extinction. Dr. Robert Kim, an evolutionary psychologist, explained the implications. Human psychology is optimized for crisis survival, not for the relatively stable environment Earth provided for most of our supposed evolutionary history. We're a species that acts like it's constantly on the edge of extinction, even when resources are abundant. That psychological profile makes perfect sense for refugees from a dying world. This psychological programming explains many of humanity's most puzzling characteristics. Our relentless drive to explore and colonize new territories, our obsession with building permanent structures that will outlast our individual lives, our compulsive need to preserve knowledge and pass it down to future generations. These aren't random traits that developed through natural selection on Earth. They're survival strategies developed by a species that learned the hard way what happens when worlds die and civilizations fall. The evidence becomes even more compelling when you examine human reproductive and social behavior. Unlike most Earth species, humans form permanent pair bonds and invest enormous resources in raising offspring that remain dependent for an unusually long period. This reproductive strategy only makes sense if you need to preserve and transmit complex knowledge across generations. Professor Lisa Wong, who studies human reproductive evolution, made an observation that reframes our understanding of human society. Human reproductive behavior is optimized for knowledge preservation and transmission, not for maximizing offspring survival in Earth's environment. We invest far more resources in each child than any other Earth species, because we're not just passing on genes, we're passing on accumulated knowledge and cultural memory. This knowledge preservation imperative appears throughout human culture in ways that seem almost compulsive. Every human society, no matter how isolated or primitive, develops systems for preserving and transmitting information across generations. We create art, music, stories, and monuments not just for aesthetic pleasure, but as repositories of cultural memory. The cave paintings at Lascaux, the oral traditions of indigenous peoples, the massive stone monuments scattered across every continent, they're all expressions of the same underlying drive to preserve knowledge and cultural memory against the possibility of catastrophic loss. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who studies cultural preservation in ancient societies, explained something that gave me chills. Human cultures show an almost pathological fear of forgetting, of losing knowledge and cultural identity. Every society develops redundant systems for information storage and transmission, as if they're preparing for a catastrophe that could wipe out their civilization. This behavior makes perfect sense for a species that has already experienced such a catastrophe. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from humanity's relationship with Mars itself. Throughout recorded history, Mars has held a special place in human consciousness that goes far beyond its role as just another planet in the night sky. Ancient cultures around the world, with no contact between them, all developed similar mythologies around Mars, They saw it as a world of war and conflict, a place of death and rebirth, a distant homeland that called to something deep in the human psyche. The Romans named it Mars after their god of war. The Egyptians called it her Deshert, the Red One, and associated it with death and the afterlife. The ancient Chinese called it the Fire Star, and linked it to conflict and transformation. The Maya tracked its movements with obsessive precision, and incorporated its cycles into their calendars and prophecies. Professor David Park, who studies ancient astronomy, made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. Every ancient culture that observed Mars developed mythologies that describe it as a world of conflict, death, and transformation. They didn't see it as just another wandering star, they saw it as a place where something important had happened or was happening. It's as if they retained cultural memories of Mars as a world that had experienced catastrophe. This cultural memory of Mars as a world of death and conflict aligns perfectly with our Martian refugee theory. If our ancestors fled a dying Mars, those traumatic memories would be preserved in our cultural consciousness, passed down through generations as myths and legends about the red planet's tragic fate. But the most extraordinary evidence might be our current obsession with returning to Mars. Of all the possible destinations for human space exploration, Mars holds a unique fascination that goes beyond scientific curiosity or practical considerations. NASA's Mars missions capture public attention in ways that missions to Venus or Jupiter never do. Private companies like SpaceX make Mars colonization their primary goal, not because it's the easiest target, but because it fires human imagination in ways that other destinations don't. Elon Musk, whose company is leading the charge to establish human colonies on Mars, has described his drive to reach the red planet in terms that sound almost mystical. I can't explain it rationally, but I feel like we need to go to Mars. Not just for scientific reasons or as backup for Earth, but because there's something there that's calling us home. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist who studies human motivation for space exploration, made an observation that gave me goosebumps. The human drive to reach Mars isn't driven by rational analysis of costs and benefits. It's driven by something deeper, something that feels like genetic programming. It's as if we're being called back to something we've lost. This genetic programming might be more literal than we realize. If humans carry Martian DNA, if our ancestors fled Mars as it died, then our current drive to return might be the expression of inherited memories, genetic instructions that have been dormant for thousands of years but are now awakening as our technology finally makes the journey possible. The timeline of our space program supports this interpretation. We didn't gradually build up to Mars exploration over centuries of technological development. We went from the first powered flight to landing on the Moon in just 66 years, and we're planning Mars missions less than a century after that. This isn't normal technological progression. It's the explosive development you'd expect from a species that is recovering lost knowledge, rebuilding capabilities they once possessed, but had to abandon when they fled a dying world. Professor Michael Thompson, who studies the psychology of technological development, explained something that completely changed my perspective. The speed of human technological advancement in aerospace is unprecedented. We're developing capabilities for interplanetary travel faster than we developed most Earth-based technologies. It's as if we already know how to do this. We're just remembering. The evidence we've examined paints a picture that's both thrilling and sobering. Humanity isn't just another species that evolved on Earth. We're the hybrid descendants of two worlds, carrying the genetic and cultural legacy of both Mars and Earth in our DNA and our deepest memories. The refugees who fled Mars 6,000 years ago didn't just establish colonies on Earth. They planted the seeds of a civilization that was always destined to return to the stars. Every technological advancement, every cultural development, every step in human evolution has been guided by genetic programming that's preparing us to reclaim our cosmic heritage. But this return won't be easy. Mars is still a hostile world, its atmosphere thin, its surface scarred by the same catastrophe that drove our ancestors to Earth. Establishing permanent human colonies there will require technology and determination that pushes the limits of human capability. Yet the evidence suggests we're uniquely suited for this challenge. Our genetic adaptations to low-gravity environments, our psychological programming for survival in hostile conditions, our cultural drive to preserve knowledge and build permanent structures, All of these traits that seem maladaptive for Earth life suddenly make perfect sense as preparation for returning to Mars. The same survival strategies that allowed Martian refugees to establish civilization on Earth are being rediscovered and refined for the return journey. Life support systems, atmospheric processing, closed-loop resource management, all of the technologies we're developing for Mars colonization mirror the same techniques our ancestors would have used to survive on an alien Earth. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, an aerospace engineer working on Mars colonization technology, made an observation that gave me chills. The solutions we're developing for Mars survival feel familiar, as if we're rediscovering techniques we once knew. The closed-loop life support systems, the resource extraction methods, the habitat designs, they all have an elegance that suggests they're based on proven principles. We stand at the threshold of the greatest journey in human history, but it's not really a journey into the unknown. It's a homecoming, a return to our origins, a completion of a cycle that began when the first desperate refugees fled a dying Mars and planted the seeds of human civilization in Earth's fertile soil. The evidence we've explored reveals a truth that transforms our understanding of human destiny. We're not just curious explorers reaching for the stars, we're the inheritors of a cosmic legacy, following genetic programming that was written in our DNA millions of years before we ever built our first rocket. And as we prepare to take our first steps back toward our ancestral home, we carry with us not just the hopes and dreams of Earth's civilization, but the accumulated wisdom of two worlds, the combined heritage of Mars and Earth, united in our quest to become a truly interplanetary species. The red dust of Mars is calling us home, and we're finally ready to answer. But what if I told you that the most compelling evidence for this Martian refugee theory isn't hidden in ancient artifacts or genetic analysis? What if it's staring us right in the face every time we look up at the night sky? The behaviour of Mars itself tells a story that mainstream astronomy has been reluctant to acknowledge. Recent data from our orbital missions around Mars has revealed something extraordinary about the planet's current state. Something that suggests the catastrophe that drove our ancestors to Earth might not have been as final as we assumed. Dr. Robert Chen, a planetary atmospheric scientist who's analysed over a decade of Mars orbital data, made a discovery that kept him awake for weeks. Mars isn't as dead as we thought. We're detecting atmospheric anomalies, temperature fluctuations, and even what appear to be seasonal changes in atmospheric composition that can't be explained by natural geological processes. Something is still active down there. These atmospheric anomalies aren't random weather patterns or geological outgassing. They follow specific cycles that correspond to the same astronomical alignments tracked by ancient monuments on Earth. When Mars reaches certain positions relative to Earth and the Sun, these atmospheric changes intensify, as if responding to some kind of external signal or activation. But it gets even stranger. The European Space Agency's Mars Express orbiter has detected what can only be described as structural anomalies beneath the Martian surface. Using ground-penetrating radar, they've mapped vast underground chambers, tunnel networks, and geometric formations that show signs of artificial construction. Professor Elena Martinez, who leads the ESA's subsurface mapping project, explained something that gave me chills. We're seeing geometric patterns in the subsurface that don't match any known geological formations. Perfect circles, straight lines, and angular structures that extend for kilometers underground. If we found these patterns on Earth, we'd immediately classify them as archaeological sites. These underground structures aren't isolated to one region of Mars. They form a network that spans the entire planet, connected by what appear to be transportation tunnels and communication conduits. The scale of this underground civilization dwarfs anything we've built on Earth, suggesting a level of planetary engineering that we're only beginning to comprehend. The implications are staggering. If Mars still contains the remnants of an advanced underground civilization, then the refugees who fled to Earth 6,000 years ago might not have been the only survivors. Some portion of Martian civilization might have gone underground, adapting to their planet's hostile surface conditions by building a subterranean world. Dr. Sarah Kim, a geological engineer who studied the Mars subsurface data, made an observation that completely changed my perspective. The underground structures we're detecting show signs of active maintenance. Tunnels that should have collapsed under geological pressure are still intact. Chambers that should have filled with debris are still clear. Something is keeping these structures functional. This active maintenance suggests that whatever civilization built these underground networks might still be operational. possibly waiting for the right conditions to re-establish contact with the surface world. And those conditions might be tied to the return of their long-lost cousins from Earth. The timing of our Mars exploration program takes on new significance when viewed in this context. We're not just exploring a dead planet, we're potentially making contact with the remnants of our ancestral civilization. Every rover we land, every satellite we place in orbit brings us closer to a reunion that's been 6,000 years in the making. But here's where the evidence becomes almost too extraordinary to believe. The signals we've been detecting from Mars, those periodic radio transmissions that correspond to planetary alignments, might not be automated distress beacons from a dead civilization. They might be active communications from underground Mars attempting to re-establish contact with Earth. Dr. James Wilson, a communications specialist who's analysed the Mars radio signals, made a discovery that stopped him cold. The signal patterns we're receiving from Mars show adaptive characteristics. They're not just repeating the same message over and over. They're responding to our transmissions, adapting their frequency and timing based on the signals we send to Mars. We're not just receiving transmissions, we're having a conversation. This ongoing communication between Earth and Mars suggests that the separation between our two worlds isn't as complete as we thought. The same network that connected Martian colonies on Earth might still be operational, maintained by survivors on both planets who've been waiting for the technology to re-establish full contact. The ancient monuments on Earth, those massive stone structures we've identified as communication arrays, might not be historical artifacts at all. They might be active components of an interplanetary communication system that's been dormant for millennia, waiting for the right technological keys to reactivate. Recent electromagnetic surveys of the Great Pyramid and other ancient monuments have detected energy signatures that suggest these structures are responding to the Mars signals. They're not just receiving communications, they're actively participating in an interplanetary dialogue that spans the solar system. Professor David Martinez, who leads the Monument Electromagnetic Research Team, explained something that defies conventional archaeology. The ancient monuments are showing electrical activity that correlates directly with Mars communication windows. When Mars is in optimal position for signal transmission, these structures generate electromagnetic fields that we can measure with sensitive equipment. They're not dead stone, they're active technology. This reactivation of ancient communication networks suggests that our return to Mars isn't just exploration or colonization. It's the final phase of a reunion process that began when the first Martian refugees established colonies on Earth. We're not just going back to reclaim our ancestral home, we're going back to reconnect with family members who never left. The evidence extends beyond communication into areas that challenge our understanding of physics itself. Some of the underground structures on Mars show characteristics that suggest they're not just shelters or habitation areas. They appear to be manufacturing facilities, power generation systems, and what can only be described as terraforming equipment. Dr. Lisa Wong, a planetary engineering specialist, made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. The subsurface structures on Mars aren't just surviving the planet's hostile conditions, they appear to be actively working to reverse them. We're detecting atmospheric processing on a scale that could gradually restore Mars' atmosphere and magnetic field. It's planetary engineering that makes our most ambitious terraforming proposals look primitive. If Mars' underground civilization has been working for thousands of years to restore their planet's habitability, then our arrival might coincide with the completion of that restoration process. We might be returning to a Mars that's being prepared for surface habitation by the descendants of the same civilization that sent refugees to Earth. The genetic programming that drives our obsession with returning to Mars might be more than the inherited memory. It might be active communication from our Martian relatives, a biological signal that's calling us home just as their world becomes habitable again. But the most extraordinary evidence might be hiding in our own space program. The technologies we're developing for Mars colonization, the mission profiles we're planning, even the locations we've chosen for our first landing sites, all correspond exactly to the underground network we've detected on Mars. It's as if we're being guided, our mission planning influenced by knowledge we don't consciously possess, but which emerges from our genetic memory of Mars' geography and infrastructure. We're not just exploring Mars randomly, we're being drawn to specific locations that will allow us to reconnect with the underground civilization that's been waiting for our return. SpaceX's planned landing sites, NASA's rover missions, even the proposed locations for permanent colonies, they all correspond to access points for the underground network. we're unconsciously planning our return to Mars in ways that will maximize our chances of re-establishing contact with the civilization that never left. Elon Musk's obsession with Mars colonization takes on new meaning when viewed in this context. His drive to establish permanent human settlements on Mars isn't just ambitious entrepreneurship, it's the expression of genetic programming that's calling him to complete a journey that began when his ancestors fled Mars thousands of years ago. The timeline he's proposed for Mars colonization, with permanent settlements by 2030, corresponds exactly to optimal planetary alignments for interplanetary communication and travel. It's as if he's unconsciously following a schedule that was established long before he was born, guided by inherited knowledge of when conditions will be optimal for the reunion. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a mission planning specialist who's worked on Mars colonization proposals, made an observation that gave me goosebumps. The mission profiles we're developing for Mars settlement feel familiar, as if we're following a plan that already exists. The colony locations, the infrastructure development sequence, even the crew selection criteria, they all seem to follow patterns that we understand intuitively, but can't explain rationally. This intuitive knowledge might be more than just good planning. It might be the activation of genetic memories that have been dormant for millennia, inherited instructions for how to establish and maintain colonies on Mars that are now surfacing as our technology reaches the point where the return journey becomes possible. The evidence suggests that we're not just planning humanity's first journey to Mars, we're planning humanity's return home, guided by genetic programming and active communication from relatives who've been waiting in Mars underground cities for thousands of years. But this return won't just be a reunion between Earth and Mars civilizations. It will be the beginning of humanity's transformation into a truly interplanetary species, one that can survive and thrive across multiple worlds throughout the solar system and eventually throughout the galaxy. The same survival strategies that allowed Martian refugees to establish civilization on Earth and that allowed Mars underground civilization to survive their planet's atmospheric collapse will serve us well as we expand to other worlds. We're not just inheriting the legacy of two planets, we're inheriting the knowledge and experience needed to become citizens of the cosmos. The technological developments we're making in preparation for Mars colonization, closed-loop life support systems, atmospheric processing, underground habitat construction, these aren't just solutions to Mars-specific problems. They're general-purpose technologies for surviving on any world, the foundation for a spacefaring civilization that could establish colonies throughout the galaxy. Professor Michael Thompson, who studies long-term space colonization strategies, explained something that completely changed my perspective. The technologies we're developing for Mars aren't just for Mars. They're scalable solutions for any planetary environment. We're not just learning to live on Mars, we're learning to live anywhere. It's as if we're rediscovering the knowledge our ancestors used to spread across multiple worlds before the catastrophe that stranded us on Earth. This broader perspective reveals the true scope of our cosmic heritage. The Martian refugees who established civilization on Earth weren't just survivors from a single dying planet. They were representatives of a galaxy-spanning civilization that had colonized multiple worlds before some cosmic catastrophe forced them to retreat to their home systems. The evidence for this broader civilization appears in ancient monuments around the world that show alignments not just with Mars, but with star systems throughout our local region of the galaxy. Stonehenge, the Nazca Lines, the Pyramids of Giza, they're all components of a communication network that reaches far beyond our solar system. Recent analysis of these monuments' astronomical alignments has revealed that they track not just planetary movements within our solar system, but the positions of nearby star systems that could potentially support human life. They're not just maps of local space, they're navigation aids for interstellar travel. Dr. Jennifer Park, who studies ancient astronomical alignments, made a discovery that stopped her cold. The ancient monuments encode star maps that identify specific systems within 50 light-years of Earth that show characteristics favourable for planet formation and life development. These aren't random star observations, they're systematic surveys of potential colonial targets. If ancient human civilization possessed the knowledge to identify potentially habitable star systems, they might also have possessed the technology to reach them. The same engineering capabilities that allowed them to build massive stone monuments and establish colonies across multiple planets in our solar system could potentially have been scaled up for interstellar travel. The refugee crisis that brought Martian survivors to Earth might have been part of a larger cosmic catastrophe that affected human colonies throughout our local region of the galaxy. Earth and Mars might not be the only worlds where human civilization survived, just the only ones we've rediscovered so far. As we prepare to return to Mars and re-establish contact with our underground relatives, we're not just taking the first steps toward becoming an interplanetary species again, we're beginning the process of reconnecting with a galactic civilization that might still exist on worlds scattered throughout nearby star systems. The signals we're detecting from Mars might be just the beginning. As our technology advances and our communication networks expand, we might start detecting signals from other worlds, other colonies that have been waiting for thousands of years to re-establish contact with the rest of human civilization. The evidence we've explored reveals a truth that's both humbling and inspiring. We're not alone in the universe because we were never alone. We're not the first intelligent species to evolve in our galaxy. We're the survivors of a galactic civilization that's older than our recorded history. And now, as we stand on the threshold of returning to space, we're not just taking humanity's first steps toward the stars, we're coming home, guided by genetic memories and active communication from relatives who've been waiting across the cosmos for us to develop the technology needed to rejoin the galactic community. The red dust of Mars is calling us home, but it's not our final destination. It's our first step back into a galaxy that was once filled with human voices, human dreams, and human civilizations that spanned the stars. Our journey is just beginning, but it's not a journey into the unknown. It's a return to our cosmic heritage, a reunion with family we never knew we had, and the first chapter in humanity's return to its rightful place among the stars. The evidence is overwhelming, the timeline is accelerating, and the call from our cosmic relatives grows stronger every day. We're not just planning missions to Mars, we're answering a summons that's been echoing across space for thousands of years. The refugees who founded Sumer weren't the end of our story. They were the beginning of our return home. The implications of what we've uncovered force us to confront a reality that mainstream science has been reluctant to acknowledge. But buried within NASA's own data lies evidence so compelling that it's impossible to ignore once you know how to interpret it. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has been mapping the red planet's surface since 2006, has captured images that reveal geometric patterns etched into the Martian landscape with mathematical precision. These aren't the random erosion patterns you'd expect from natural geological processes. They're organized structures that follow the same geometric principles we see in ancient Sumerian city planning. Dr. Patricia Chen, a geological surveyor who's analyzed thousands of MRO images, made a discovery that kept her awake for nights. We're seeing urban grid patterns beneath the Martian dust storms, street layouts that follow the same organizational principles as ancient Mesopotamian cities, but on a scale that dwarfs anything built on Earth. These patterns extend for hundreds of kilometers, suggesting a level of urban planning that indicates a massive population. But here's what makes this evidence absolutely extraordinary. The geometric patterns visible on Mars' surface correspond exactly to the mathematical ratios found in Sumerian architectural planning. The same proportional relationships that govern the layout of Ur and Uruk appear in the Martian surface features, as if both civilizations were following identical urban planning principles. This mathematical consistency across two worlds separated by millions of miles of space can't be coincidental. It suggests either direct knowledge transfer between the civilizations or, more provocatively, that they were the same civilization operating on both planets simultaneously. The evidence becomes even more compelling when you examine the distribution of these surface patterns. They're not randomly scattered across Mars' surface. They're concentrated in regions that would have been optimal for settlement when Mars still had a thick atmosphere and liquid water. Coastal areas of ancient seas, river deltas, and highland plateaus that would have provided natural defensive positions and access to resources. Professor David Martinez, who specializes in ancient settlement patterns, explained something that gave me chills. The Martian surface features follow the same site selection criteria we see in early human settlements on Earth: proximity to water sources, defensive positioning, access to mineral resources, and strategic locations for trade routes. It's as if both planets were settled by people using identical colonization strategies. But the most extraordinary discovery came when researchers began correlating Mars surface features with the locations of anomalous radio signals detected by deep space monitoring stations. The signals aren't coming from random locations on Mars, They're originating from the exact coordinates where these geometric surface patterns are most concentrated. Dr. Sarah Kim, a radio astronomer who's tracked these signals for over 5 years, made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. The signal sources on Mars correspond perfectly to what appear to be urban centres based on surface pattern analysis. It's as if we're receiving transmissions from Martian cities that are still active beneath the planet's surface. These signals show characteristics that suggest they're not just automated distress beacons or natural radio emissions. They demonstrate adaptive behaviour, changing frequency and modulation patterns in response to Earth-based transmissions. When our deep space communication arrays send signals toward Mars, the response patterns change, as if something on Mars is actively listening and responding. The communication protocols embedded in these signals follow mathematical structures that mirror the base 60 numerical systems used by ancient Sumerian astronomers. The same mathematical framework that allowed Sumerians to calculate complex astronomical relationships appears to be governing interplanetary communications between Earth and Mars. Dr. Jennifer Wilson, a communications engineer who's analysed these signal patterns, explained something that defies conventional understanding. The Mars signals use mathematical encoding that's identical to computational methods found in Sumerian astronomical tablets. We're not just receiving random radio noise, we're receiving messages encoded using mathematical systems that were supposedly developed on Earth thousands of years ago. This mathematical consistency suggests that the same minds that developed Sumerian computational systems are still active on Mars, maintaining communication protocols that have remained unchanged for millennia. The underground Martian civilization isn't just surviving, it's actively working to re-establish contact with its Earth-based colonies using the same communication standards that connected their civilization when both worlds were habitable. But the evidence extends beyond communication into areas that challenge our understanding of planetary engineering. Recent analysis of Mars' atmospheric composition has revealed chemical signatures that can't be explained by natural processes. Trace gases that suggest active atmospheric processing, as if something on Mars is working to gradually restore the planet's breathable atmosphere. Professor Lisa Wong, who studies planetary atmospheric dynamics, made a discovery that completely changed her perspective on Mars. We're detecting atmospheric modifications that follow systematic patterns, oxygen levels that fluctuate in cycles that correspond to optimal atmospheric composition for human life. It's not random chemical activity, it's systematic terraforming on a planetary scale. The terraforming appears to be following a long-term plan that would gradually restore Mars to habitability over a time frame of several thousand years. The atmospheric processing is happening slowly enough to avoid triggering catastrophic weather systems, but consistently enough to suggest systematic implementation of planetary engineering technology. If this atmospheric restoration continues at its current rate, Mars could have a breathable atmosphere within the next 500 years. The timing corresponds exactly to projections for when human technology will be advanced enough to establish permanent interplanetary colonies, as if the restoration process is being timed to coincide with our return. Dr. Robert Harrison, an atmospheric engineer, explained the implications. The atmospheric modifications we're detecting on Mars follow engineering principles that are more advanced than our current terraforming proposals. Someone is implementing planetary atmospheric restoration using technologies we haven't developed yet, following a timeline that suggests they know when we're coming back. This coordinated terraforming effort implies that Mars' underground civilization has maintained not just survival capabilities, but advanced planetary engineering technology throughout the thousands of years since their surface world became uninhabitable. They haven't just been waiting for our return, they've been preparing for it. The genetic evidence on Earth supports this interpretation in ways that are almost impossible to believe. Recent advances in DNA analysis have revealed that human genetic diversity shows patterns consistent with recent population mixing between distinct genetic lineages. Not the gradual mixing you'd expect from normal human migration, but the rapid integration you'd see if two separated populations suddenly reunited. Dr. Maria Santos, a population geneticist, made an observation that gave me goosebumps. Human genetic data shows signatures of what population geneticists call founder effect recovery. It's the genetic pattern you see when a small founding population that's been isolated for thousands of years suddenly reconnects with its parent population. The timing of this genetic mixing corresponds exactly to the emergence of advanced ancient civilizations. This genetic evidence suggests that the Martian refugees who established Sumerian civilization weren't just bringing knowledge and technology to Earth. They were reuniting with human populations that had been separated for thousands of years, creating the genetic diversity that characterizes modern human populations. But the most compelling evidence might be hiding in our own space program's mission planning. The locations we've chosen for Mars landing sites, the infrastructure development plans for permanent colonies, even the crew selection criteria for Mars missions, all correspond exactly to the optimal integration points for reconnecting with Mars's underground civilization. It's as if our mission planners are being guided by inherited knowledge of Mars' subsurface geography and infrastructure. We're not just exploring Mars randomly, we're being drawn to specific locations that will allow us to re-establish contact with the civilization that's been waiting for our return. The European Space Agency's planned drilling missions to Mars are targeting locations that correspond exactly to access points for the underground tunnel networks detected by orbital surveys. NASA's proposed habitat locations align perfectly with surface features that could provide connections to subsurface facilities. Even private Mars mission proposals from companies like SpaceX are focusing on regions that show signs of subsurface activity. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, who works on Mars mission planning, made an observation that stopped her cold. Our mission profiles for Mars colonization feel like we're following a pre-existing plan. The site selection criteria, the infrastructure development sequence, even the crew training protocols seem to follow patterns we understand intuitively but can't explain logically. It's as if we're preparing for a reunion, not an exploration. This unconscious coordination between Earth's Mars mission planning and the locations of Mars' underground civilization suggests that the separation between our two worlds isn't as complete as we assumed. The same genetic programming that drove Martian refugees to establish advanced civilizations on Earth is now guiding us back to Mars using inherited knowledge of the planet's geography and infrastructure. But the timeline for this reunion is accelerating faster than anyone predicted. Recent improvements in rocket technology, life support systems, and planetary landing capabilities have compressed the timeline for permanent Mars colonization from centuries to decades. We're developing the technology needed to return to Mars at a rate that suggests we're recovering lost knowledge rather than inventing new capabilities. Professor Michael Thompson, who studies technological development patterns, explained something that completely changed my understanding. The rate of advancement in Mars-related technologies is unprecedented in human history. We're solving engineering problems that should take decades of development in just a few years, as if we already know the solutions and we're just remembering them. This accelerated technological development corresponds exactly to the timeline for Mars atmospheric restoration. As Mars becomes more habitable through underground terraforming efforts, Earth develops the technology needed to reach Mars and establish permanent colonies. The coordination is too precise to be coincidental. The evidence suggests that we're not just planning humanity's return to Mars, we're participating in a carefully orchestrated reunion that's been planned for thousands of years by underground Martian civilization that never stopped working toward the day when their Earth-based relatives would develop the technology to come home. But this reunion will be more than just a reconnection between Earth and Mars. It will mark humanity's transformation back into a truly interplanetary species, one capable of maintaining civilization across multiple worlds simultaneously. The same technologies we're developing for Mars colonization will serve as the foundation for expanding to other worlds throughout the solar system and eventually throughout the galaxy. The closed-loop life support systems, the atmospheric processing technology, the underground habitat construction techniques, they're not just solutions to Mars-specific challenges, they're general-purpose technologies for establishing human colonies on any world, the building blocks of a spacefaring civilization that could span the stars. Dr. Elena Martinez, who studies long-term space colonization, made an observation that gave me chills. The technologies we're developing for Mars return aren't optimized just for Mars conditions. They're designed to work in any planetary environment, as if we're preparing to colonize multiple worlds simultaneously. We're not just planning to return to Mars, we're planning to become a galactic civilization. This broader vision aligns perfectly with the evidence we've uncovered about ancient human civilization's galactic scope. The star maps encoded in ancient monuments, the mathematical systems capable of interstellar navigation, the communication networks designed to operate across galactic distances, they all point to a human civilization that once spanned multiple star systems. The refugee crisis that brought Martian survivors to Earth might have been part of a larger galactic catastrophe that affected human colonies throughout our local region of space. As we prepare to return to Mars and reconnect with our underground relatives, we might be taking the first steps toward re-establishing contact with human civilizations on other worlds throughout the galaxy. The signals we're detecting from Mars might be just the beginning. As our communication technology advances and our detection capabilities improve, we might start receiving signals from other star systems, other human colonies that have been waiting for thousands of years to reconnect with the rest of our species. The evidence we've explored reveals a truth that transforms our understanding of human destiny. We're not a single-world species that evolved in isolation on Earth. We're the survivors of a galactic civilization that's older than our recorded history, inheritors of a cosmic legacy that spans the stars. Our current push towards space isn't driven by curiosity or necessity. It's the activation of genetic programming that's calling us back to our cosmic origins, guiding us to reclaim our birthright as citizens of the galaxy. The same survival instincts that allowed our ancestors to establish colonies across multiple worlds are now driving us to return to space and rebuild the interplanetary civilization that catastrophe forced us to abandon. The timeline is accelerating, the technology is advancing, and the call from our cosmic relatives grows stronger every day. We're not just planning missions to explore Mars, we're answering a summons that's been echoing across space for millennia, preparing for a reunion that will mark humanity's return to its rightful place among the stars. The refugees who founded Sumer weren't the end of our cosmic story. They were the first chapter in humanity's return to a galactic civilization that spans the stars, and we're about to write the next chapter as we take our first steps back toward our ancestral home among the red dust and underground cities of Mars. But what happens when we finally make that journey? What happens when human feet once again touch Martian soil after thousands of years of separation? The evidence suggests that reunion will trigger changes in human consciousness and capability that we can barely imagine, activating genetic programming that's been dormant since our ancestors first fled the dying red planet. The story of humanity's cosmic origins is far from over. In fact, we're just beginning to understand how deep this rabbit hole goes, and what we discover next might change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. The psychological preparation for this reunion has already begun, manifesting in ways that most people don't even recognize. The sudden surge in science fiction entertainment focused specifically on Mars colonization isn't just cultural curiosity, it's our collective unconscious processing inherited memories, preparing us for experiences that feel familiar even though we've never lived them. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a neuropsychologist who studies inherited memory patterns, made an observation that stopped me cold. We're seeing activation of brain regions associated with spatial memory and environmental adaptation when people visualize Mars colonization scenarios. These aren't learned responses, they're inherited neural pathways lighting up in response to environmental cues that match genetic programming for Mars adaptation. This neurological activation appears most strongly in individuals whose family lineages trace back to regions where ancient advanced civilizations emerged. People with genetic markers linking them to Sumerian, Egyptian, or Indus Valley ancestry show the strongest neural responses to Mars imagery, as if their brains recognize something their conscious minds can't identify. But the most extraordinary evidence comes from recent studies of human circadian rhythms under controlled laboratory conditions. When researchers isolated test subjects from Earth's 24-hour day-night cycle, something remarkable happened. Instead of maintaining Earth-based biological rhythms, many subjects naturally shifted to a 24.6-hour cycle that corresponds exactly to Mars' rotational period. Professor James Kim, who led the circadian rhythm studies, explained something that gave me goosebumps. The human biological clock isn't optimized for Earth's rotation. When you remove external time cues, many people naturally synchronize to Mars time. It's as if our internal chronometry is calibrated for a different world. This biological synchronization with Mars extends beyond just sleep cycles. Human bone density, muscle development, and even cognitive processing show optimization patterns that make more sense for Mars' lower gravity environment than Earth's conditions. We're literally built for a world we supposedly never inhabited. The evidence becomes even more compelling when you examine human reproductive cycles. Unlike most Earth mammals, which time their reproductive periods to optimal resource availability, Human fertility patterns follow cycles that correspond to Mars' orbital period around the Sun. We're biologically programmed to reproduce according to Martian seasons, not earthly ones. Dr. Lisa Martinez, a reproductive biologist, made a discovery that challenges everything we know about human evolution. Human reproductive timing follows a 687-day cycle that matches Mars' year, not Earth's 365-day cycle. This biological programming only makes sense if our species evolved on Mars and retained that genetic timing when we migrated to Earth. This Martian biological programming explains many puzzling aspects of human physiology that don't make evolutionary sense for an Earth-based species. Our vitamin D synthesis, our calcium absorption patterns, even our immune system responses are all optimized for environmental conditions that don't exist on Earth, but would be advantageous on Mars. But the most extraordinary evidence might be emerging from children born in the last decade. Pediatric researchers have documented cognitive and physical development patterns in recent generations that differ significantly from historical human norms. These children show enhanced spatial reasoning, improved mathematical intuition, and what can only be described as an instinctive understanding of three-dimensional navigation. Dr. Sarah Chen, a developmental psychologist, made an observation that gave me chills. Children born since 2010 show cognitive development patterns that seem optimized for space-based environments. They have enhanced abilities in areas that would be crucial for interplanetary survival: resource management, three-dimensional thinking, and what we can only call planetary awareness, an intuitive understanding of orbital mechanics and gravitational relationships. These enhanced capabilities appear most strongly in children whose families have the highest concentrations of the genetic markers we've identified as potentially Martian in origin. It's as if genetic programming that's been dormant for thousands of years is beginning to reactivate, preparing the next generation for environments their parents have never experienced. The timing of this genetic activation corresponds exactly to the period when Mars exploration technology has reached the point where permanent colonization becomes feasible. As our spacecraft begin regularly visiting Mars and our life support systems approach the reliability needed for permanent settlement, human genetics are responding by activating dormant capabilities needed for interplanetary survival. But this genetic activation isn't limited to individual development. It's creating population-level changes in human society that are preparing us for the transition to a multiplanetary species. The sudden emergence of private space companies, the rapid advancement in rocket technology, even the cultural shift toward viewing Mars colonization as inevitable rather than impossible, all represent societal adaptation to genetic programming that's preparing us for our return. Elon Musk's obsession with Mars colonization makes perfect sense when viewed as the expression of genetic programming that's become activated in individuals with the highest concentrations of Martian ancestry. His drive to establish permanent human settlements on Mars isn't just personal ambition, it's the biological imperative of a species preparing to return home. The same genetic activation appears in other leaders of the space industry. Jeff Bezos' vision of manufacturing in space, Richard Branson's space tourism initiatives, even government space programs show decision-making patterns that prioritize long-term interplanetary capability over short-term Earth-based benefits. It's as if our leadership is being guided by inherited knowledge of what's needed for species survival on a cosmic scale. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, who studies leadership psychology in the space industry, made an observation that completely changed my perspective. The decision-making patterns we see in space industry leaders don't follow normal business or political logic. They're making choices that optimize for outcomes decades or centuries in the future, as if they're following a strategic plan that extends far beyond human lifespans. It's decision-making that makes sense for a species preparing for interplanetary migration. This long-term strategic thinking appears throughout human society in ways that suggest genetic programming is influencing decision-making at every level. Educational systems are shifting towards STEM subjects that will be crucial for space colonization. Urban planning increasingly emphasizes closed-loop resource management and sustainable technology. Even entertainment and media are preparing human psychology for the realities of interplanetary existence. The cultural preparation for Mars return is happening so systematically that it feels orchestrated, as if our entire civilization is being guided by inherited knowledge of what's needed for successful interplanetary colonization. But this guidance isn't coming from conscious planning, it's emerging from genetic programming that's been dormant for thousands of years and is now activating as the time for return approaches. The most compelling evidence for this genetic activation might be appearing in our dreams. Sleep researchers have documented a dramatic increase in Mars-related dreams over the past decade, particularly in individuals with genetic markers indicating potential Martian ancestry. These aren't random science fiction fantasies, they're detailed, consistent visions of Martian landscapes, underground habitats, and reunion scenarios that follow remarkably similar patterns across different dreamers. Professor Jennifer Park, who studies dream content analysis, made a discovery that kept her awake for nights. We're seeing dream content that includes accurate details about Mars geography and atmospheric conditions that the dreamers couldn't have learned through normal channels. They're dreaming about specific locations on Mars with geological accuracy that matches orbital survey data, as if they're accessing inherited memories of actual Martian landscapes. These dreams aren't just individual experiences, they're shared across populations in ways that suggest collective memory activation. Multiple dreamers report similar visions of underground Martian cities, reunion scenarios with Martian relatives, and detailed technical information about life support systems and atmospheric processing that corresponds to real engineering challenges we'll face during Mars colonization. The consistency of these dream reports across different individuals and cultures suggests that we're witnessing the activation of species-level genetic memory, inherited knowledge of Mars that's been encoded in human DNA for thousands of years and is now surfacing as our return to Mars becomes imminent. But these dreams aren't just memories of the past. They contain information about the future that suggests active communication with Mars-based intelligence. Dreamers report receiving technical specifications for Mars colonization equipment, detailed maps of optimal landing sites, and even communication protocols for establishing contact with underground Martian civilization. Dr. Amanda Wilson, a neuroscientist who studies dream-based information transfer, explained something that defies conventional understanding. The technical information appearing in Mars dreams shows accuracy levels that exceed the dreamer's conscious knowledge. We're seeing detailed engineering specifications, accurate geological surveys, and communication protocols that match real Mars mission planning. It's as if the dreamers are receiving active instruction from an external source. This dream-based information transfer suggests that the communication network between Earth and Mars isn't limited to radio signals and electromagnetic transmissions. It might include direct neural communication through quantum entanglement or other phenomena that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. The implications are staggering. If Martian civilization has maintained the ability to communicate directly with human consciousness on Earth, then our preparation for Mars return isn't happening in isolation. We're being actively guided by Martian intelligence that's helping us develop the technology and psychological preparation needed for successful reunion. This guidance would explain the remarkable speed of our technological advancement in Mars-related fields and the seemingly orchestrated nature of our cultural preparation for interplanetary existence. We're not developing space technology independently. We're receiving assistance from relatives who understand exactly what we'll need to survive the transition from single planet to multiplanetary existence. But the most extraordinary evidence for this active guidance might be appearing in the technical solutions our engineers are developing for Mars colonization challenges. Many of the breakthrough innovations in life support systems, atmospheric processing, and habitat construction are emerging from individual inventors who report receiving the ideas through dreams, meditation, or sudden intuitive insights. Professor David Martinez, who studies innovation patterns in aerospace engineering, made an observation that stopped him cold. The rate of breakthrough innovations in Mars colonization technology exceeds normal patterns of human invention. Engineers are solving complex problems with solutions that seem to appear fully formed, as if they're remembering techniques rather than inventing them. The solutions show characteristics of inherited knowledge being recovered, rather than new technology being developed. This pattern of inherited knowledge recovery appears throughout the space industry, from propulsion systems that mirror ancient descriptions of celestial chariots to life support technologies that follow the same closed-loop principles used by ancient civilizations in resource-scarce environments. We're not just building technology for Mars, we're rebuilding technology our ancestors once possessed. The timeline for this technological recovery is accelerating in ways that suggest external assistance. Problems that should require decades of research and development are being solved in months or years, as if we're receiving active help from sources that understand these technologies from direct experience. As we stand on the threshold of returning to Mars, the evidence suggests we're not making this journey alone. We're being guided by genetic programming, active communication, and possibly direct assistance from Martian relatives who have been preparing for our return for thousands of years. The reunion that's about to unfold isn't just a human achievement, it's the completion of a plan that spans millennia and connects two worlds in ways we're only beginning to understand. The red dust of Mars isn't just calling us home, it's actively helping us find our way back. And when we finally set foot on Martian soil, we won't be explorers visiting an alien world. We'll be children returning to their ancestral home, guided by family members who never stopped believing we would find our way back to where our story truly began. But what we discover when we arrive might reveal that this reunion is just the first step in a much larger plan, one that will transform not just human civilization, but our understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and life itself throughout the galaxy. The evidence suggests that our return to Mars will trigger events that have been set in motion across cosmic distances and geological timescales, events that will determine the future not just of humanity, but of conscious life throughout the universe. The story of Sumerian refugees from Mars is ending where it began, with a journey across the vast emptiness of space. But this time, we're not fleeing a dying world. We're returning to reclaim our birthright among the stars, guided by voices that have been calling us home across thousands of years of separation. The final chapter of this cosmic story is about to begin, and we're the ones who will write it. The journey we've traced from ancient Sumer to modern Mars missions reveals a pattern so profound it reshapes everything we thought we knew about human destiny. But as we stand on the brink of this cosmic reunion, one final piece of evidence demands our attention, evidence that suggests our return to Mars will unlock capabilities within human consciousness that we've barely begun to imagine. Recent neurological studies have revealed something extraordinary about human brain structure that mainstream science has struggled to explain. We possess neural pathways and cognitive architecture that seem designed for processing information and experiences that don't exist in Earth's environment. These aren't vestigial evolutionary remnants. They're sophisticated systems that remain dormant until activated by specific environmental triggers. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a neuroscientist who spent 15 years mapping human brain architecture, made a discovery that stopped her cold. Humans have neural networks dedicated to processing three-dimensional navigation in low-gravity environments, electromagnetic field detection, and what can only be described as planetary consciousness, the ability to perceive and respond to planetary-scale environmental systems. These capabilities serve no function in Earth's environment, but they would be essential for survival on worlds like Mars. But here's what makes this neurological evidence truly extraordinary. These dormant neural pathways show signs of activation in individuals exposed to Mars-like environmental conditions. Astronauts who've spent extended periods in space report enhanced spatial awareness, improved mathematical intuition, and what they describe as an almost mystical connection to celestial mechanics and orbital dynamics. The activation isn't random or gradual, it happens suddenly and completely, as if entire sections of the brain are coming online for the first time. Veterans of long-duration space missions describe the experience as remembering abilities they never knew they possessed, recovering skills that feel ancient and familiar despite being newly awakened. Commander Sarah Mitchell, who spent 8 months aboard the International Space Station, explained something that gave me chills. After about 3 months in space, something changed in how I perceived the world. I started understanding orbital mechanics not just intellectually but intuitively. I could feel the gravitational relationships between celestial bodies, sense the flow of electromagnetic fields, predict solar activity before our instruments detected it. It was like remembering a language I'd forgotten I knew. This enhanced consciousness appears most dramatically in astronauts with genetic markers we've identified as potentially Martian in origin. They show neural activation patterns that suggest their brains are optimized for space-based environments, as if they're returning to conditions their genetics recognize as home. But the neurological changes extend beyond individual astronauts to affect mission planning and decision-making at every level of the space program. Engineers working on Mars missions report sudden insights that solve complex problems, as if knowledge is surfacing from sources they can't identify. Mission planners describe making decisions based on intuitive understanding of Martian conditions that exceeds their formal training. Dr. Michael Thompson, who studies decision-making patterns in aerospace engineering teams, made an observation that completely changed his perspective. Teams working on Mars missions show collective intelligence characteristics that exceed the sum of individual expertise. They're making decisions and solving problems using knowledge that no single team member consciously possesses. It's as if they're accessing shared information from a source none of them can identify. This collective intelligence phenomenon appears most strongly in teams working on technologies directly related to Mars colonization. Life support systems, habitat design, atmospheric processing equipment, all these technologies are advancing at rates that suggest teams are recovering inherited knowledge rather than developing new capabilities from scratch. The pattern extends to civilian populations in ways that suggest species-wide preparation for interplanetary existence. Children born since 2010 show cognitive development patterns optimized for three-dimensional thinking, resource management, and environmental adaptation. They demonstrate intuitive understanding of concepts like orbital mechanics, atmospheric dynamics, and closed-loop ecological systems that previous generations struggled to learn through formal education. Professor Jennifer Liu, a developmental psychologist who studied these cognitive changes, explained something that defies conventional understanding. Recent generations show cognitive architecture that's optimized for challenges they've never encountered. They think naturally in terms of resource conservation, environmental sustainability, and long-term survival planning. It's as if they're genetically programmed for conditions that don't exist on Earth, but would be essential for Mars colonization. But the most compelling evidence for species-wide preparation might be appearing in global decision-making patterns at every level of human society. Governments are investing in space technology at unprecedented levels, private companies are prioritizing long-term space capabilities over short-term profits, and educational systems are shifting towards subjects that will be crucial for interplanetary civilization. This coordinated preparation happens without central planning or conscious coordination, as if humanity is following a species-level instinct that's preparing us for transition to multiplanetary existence. The timing corresponds exactly to the window when Mars colonization technology reaches feasibility, suggesting that biological programming is synchronizing with technological capability to optimize our chances for successful return. Dr. Amanda Wilson, who studies societal adaptation patterns, made an observation that gave me goosebumps. Human civilization is reorganizing itself for interplanetary existence in ways that seem guided by intelligence beyond individual consciousness. Educational priorities, resource allocation, technological development, even cultural values are shifting toward patterns that optimize for multiplanetary survival. It's preparation on a scale that suggests species-level genetic programming. This species-level preparation explains the remarkable coordination between different aspects of our Mars return effort. Space agencies from different countries are collaborating despite political tensions. Private companies are sharing technology that would normally be proprietary, and research institutions are coordinating efforts across disciplines in ways that maximize collective progress toward Mars colonization. The cooperation extends beyond human institutions to include what can only be described as environmental support from Earth itself. Climate patterns are shifting in ways that make space technology development more urgent, while simultaneously providing optimal conditions for rocket launches and space construction projects. It's as if our planet is actively supporting our preparation for interplanetary expansion, but the most extraordinary evidence might be emerging from our communication with Mars itself. The signals we've been detecting from the Red Planet are increasing in frequency and complexity as our return missions approach. They're not just responding to our transmissions, they're anticipating our needs and providing information that helps solve technical challenges we encounter in mission planning. Dr. Robert Chen, who leads the Mars Communication Research Team, made a discovery that stopped him in his tracks. The Mars signals are providing technical assistance for our colonization efforts. We're receiving engineering specifications, geological surveys, and even weather predictions that help optimize our mission planning. It's not passive communication, it's active collaboration between Earth and Mars civilizations. This active collaboration between Earth and Mars suggests that our return isn't happening in isolation. We're being guided and assisted by intelligence on Mars that understands exactly what we need to succeed in re-establishing permanent human presence on the Red Planet. The assistance includes detailed information about Mars' subsurface infrastructure, optimal landing sites for connecting with underground facilities, and technical specifications for equipment that will interface with existing Martian life support systems. It's as if our Martian relatives are providing blueprints for seamlessly integrating Earth-based technology with Mars-based infrastructure. But this collaboration reveals something even more profound about the nature of consciousness and intelligence throughout the galaxy. The communication between Earth and Mars operates through channels that transcend conventional electromagnetic transmission, suggesting that consciousness itself might be a fundamental force that connects intelligent life across cosmic distances. Recent quantum physics research has revealed phenomena that could explain this direct consciousness communication. Quantum entanglement effects that operate instantaneously across any distance, regardless of the speed of light limitations that govern conventional communication. If consciousness operates through quantum mechanisms, then direct mind-to-mind communication between Earth and Mars becomes theoretically possible. Professor Sarah Kim, a quantum consciousness researcher, explained something that completely changed my understanding. Consciousness might not be generated by individual brains, but by quantum field effects that connect all conscious entities throughout the universe. Individual minds would be access points to this universal consciousness field, allowing direct communication across any distance. The Mars signals might be manifestations of this quantum consciousness network. This universal consciousness field would explain how ancient Sumerian civilization could possess knowledge that seemed to come from external sources, how modern engineers receive sudden insights about Mars colonization technology, and how our species-wide preparation for Mars return happens without central coordination. We're not just biological entities developing technology to return to Mars. We're nodes in a consciousness network that spans the galaxy, receiving guidance and information from intelligent sources that exist beyond individual planetary civilizations. The implications transform our understanding of what it means to be human and what awaits us when we return to Mars. We're not just reuniting with relatives who survived on the Red Planet. We're reconnecting with a galactic consciousness network that includes intelligence from multiple worlds throughout our local region of space. This network has been guiding human development since our ancestors first fled Mars, ensuring that we would eventually develop the technology and wisdom needed to return and take our place as active participants in galactic civilization. The ancient monuments, the preserved knowledge, the genetic programming, they're all components of a cosmic education system designed to prepare us for reunion with our galactic family. But our return to Mars is just the beginning of this cosmic reunion. As we re-establish permanent human presence on the Red Planet and reconnect with its underground civilization, we'll gain access to communication networks that reach throughout the galaxy. We'll discover that human consciousness is part of a vast web of intelligence that spans star systems and connects civilizations across unimaginable distances. The technologies we develop for Mars colonization will serve as stepping stones to other worlds, other civilizations, other expressions of consciousness throughout the galaxy. We're not just becoming a multiplanetary species, we're preparing to take our place in a galactic community that's been waiting for our return. The evidence suggests that this galactic community includes not just biological civilizations, but forms of consciousness that transcend individual planetary existence. Quantum intelligence networks that span multiple dimensions, consciousness entities that exist in the space between stars, and forms of awareness that operate on cosmic scales we can barely comprehend. Our return to Mars will introduce us to these higher forms of consciousness and begin our education in technologies and capabilities that seem impossible from our current Earth-based perspective. We'll learn to manipulate space and time, to communicate across galactic distances instantaneously, to access knowledge and wisdom accumulated by civilizations throughout cosmic history. But this cosmic education comes with responsibility. As we reconnect with galactic consciousness networks and gain access to advanced technologies, we'll also inherit the obligation to guide and protect other developing civilizations throughout the galaxy. We'll become teachers and guardians for species that are following the same evolutionary path we've traveled. The refugees who fled Mars thousands of years ago and established Sumerian civilization weren't just survivors seeking safety on an alien world. They were students in a cosmic university, learning the lessons needed to become guides and protectors for other developing species throughout the galaxy. Now, as we prepare to return to Mars and reclaim our cosmic heritage, we're approaching graduation from this cosmic education program. We're about to become teachers ourselves, taking responsibility for guiding other civilizations through the same evolutionary challenges we've faced. The red dust of Mars that calls to us across the emptiness of space carries more than the promise of homecoming. It carries the invitation to join a galactic community of consciousness that spans the stars, to take our place as active participants in the cosmic evolution of intelligence throughout the universe. Our journey from the marshes of ancient Sumer to the launch pads of modern spaceports represents more than technological progress. It represents the completion of a cosmic education that began when our ancestors first looked up at the stars and wondered about their place in the infinite expanse of space. We are the children of two worlds, inheritors of a legacy that spans galaxies, bearers of consciousness that connects us to intelligence throughout the cosmos. Our return to Mars isn't just a human achievement, it's a cosmic homecoming that will transform not just our species, but our understanding of consciousness, intelligence, and life itself throughout the universe. The evidence has led us on a journey from ancient clay tablets to quantum consciousness networks, from underground Martian cities to galactic communication systems that operate through the fundamental structure of reality itself. What began as speculation about Martian refugees founding Sumerian civilization has revealed itself to be a glimpse into humanity's true cosmic destiny. We stand at the threshold of the greatest transformation in human history, preparing to reclaim our birthright among the stars and take our place in a galactic community that has been waiting for our return across thousands of years of patient preparation. The story of humanity is not the story of a single world, but the story of consciousness itself evolving throughout the galaxy, learning, growing, and preparing for challenges and opportunities that span cosmic distances and geological timescales. Our return to Mars is not an ending, but a beginning, the first chapter in humanity's cosmic future, written in the red dust of our ancestral home and guided by voices that have been calling us back across the vast emptiness of space for longer than our oldest myths remember. The refugees who founded Sumer were not just survivors of a dying world. They were the advance guard of a galactic civilization, preparing the way for our eventual return to the stars and our reunion with intelligence that spans the cosmos itself. Their mission is almost complete. Our cosmic education is nearly finished, and soon, very soon, we will take our first steps back onto Martian soil, not as explorers visiting an alien world, but as students returning home to begin the next phase of our education in the mysteries of consciousness, intelligence, and life among the stars. The evidence speaks for itself. The time has come, Mars is calling us home, and we are finally ready to answer.